call the meeting of the Monroe County Election Board to order. Members present are myself, Carolyn Vanderweel, the chair, Al Turner, our Republican representative, and Tree Martin, who is proxy for Nicole Bolden.
Nicole Brown.
I'm sorry, Nicole
Yes.
Brown. I do that every time and I just, whatever. Tree, I understand you have a written proxy from Nicole.
Actually, Karen has it on file and I sent a new updated one Monday.
Okay, so we're covered with that. So Tree Martin sitting in for Nicole Brown, the county clerk and secretary of the board. On the agenda to start, approval of the outstanding minutes from the last board meeting, the April board meeting, which Sherry, can you remind me what date that was?
April 10th.
And no, it would have been before that. Let me just-
April 1st.
First.
First. Okay.
Yes, April 1st.
Yeah, I move we approve.
I will second. Are there any amendments or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor, Karen, would you call the roll?
Al Turner,
Approve.
Tree Martin versus Nicole,
Approve.
Carolyn,
Approve. Minutes are approved. Okay, new business. We have a couple of guests here, so I'm going to try to get through things quickly. Hal, you had one item to add to the agenda, did you not? Would you just
Yes.
explain what it is?
At the last meeting, I said I would create a draft document to be used in future situations where we have a problem which may be a violation of election law. So if, with your permission, I would like to present that document to the team, to the election board for their review and updates and potential forwarding to the lawyers associated with the election board so that it can be finalized and made a part of every upcoming election from this point on.
We will add that as item F then.
Yes, would you like me to review it with everyone online right now?
I think why don't we do that after our
Yes, after the
item,
presentation.
because I think it actually will be quite appropriate at that point.
Will do.
Karen, is there an update on redistricting and the timeline for getting our information at this point?
and before I answer that, are we going to go to old business at the end? Are we trying to get through the new business?
I
This-
think we're going to get through new business and then decide if there's additional items to include.
All right. So no update, nothing from the state. And we're just sitting here waiting basically. And Lee Baker also said there's really nothing we can do until we get the census data.
Do we have any impression whether or not there's been a shift in Indiana in terms of districts for the Senate and representative districts? Like, did 9 lose population? My understanding is that the Hamilton County area is one of the few places that actually has really increased from what I read on the website. But do we have any thoughts at all from them as to what changes are going to be needed?
I have not been informed of any of that. I kind of heard very indirectly that it's probably going to be the same, but don't take it for gospel.
And do we have any idea what the potential annexation is going to do to our districting issues and what we're going to have to do about that if it doesn't happen before we redistrict?
No, I know Ellettsville is getting a little nervous. They have a lot of things that are pending over there, but everything's waiting. It's really pretty frustrating.
Okay. Moving on, the Secretary of State's office will submit a legislative update, I believe in July, And so we'll talk about, probably won't have it in the July meeting, but certainly in the August meeting, we'll have all of the election legislation that was passed in the last House that is now confirmed. Obviously, the legislature is still in session technically until November. And I know they met to override the governor's veto last week. So there may be some changes that still come up, but we will, once we have that full update, we will let everybody know what election laws have changed this year. And I believe that the clerk's office, Nicole will be as part of the clerk's conference. We'll get that information as well. Is that correct, Tree?
Well, the clerk's conference is in June, and Nicole will be going to that conference, and she'll bring us back information concerning that. The good news that we have is that we can scan now 7 days before the election. That is wonderful news to Karen and I. So the results will be given to the Secretary of State's. Hopefully we'll start at 8 p.m. on election night. So that's the good news.
So that will allow us to both cut down on staff because we'll have that week.
I'm not going to say that. I don't know. I don't know how many people are going to vote by mail. I have no way of knowing that. So right now, I'm not going to say it changes anything in staffing. It just changes the fact that we can get results to the Secretary of State and not be under the gun so hard.
Changes our timeline anyway.
It does. But as far as staffing, I don't know yet.
Yeah. Excuse me, Tree, when you say vote by mail, you mean absentee votes?
That is correct. You know how tedious it is to get that ballot out.
Yeah.
So, being able to scan is wonderful. However, I don't know how many people will be voting by mail. And voting by mail seems to be the game changer for us as workers.
Okay. So again, updates on that coming. And as soon as we have the full legislative list, we will put that out. But that's very good news because now what we need to do is to change the timing on our post-election ability to view our provisional ballots is the word I was trying to come up with. That timeline is very short, and given the number of provisional ballots we get, that can be a problem for us. So maybe we can talk to the Secretary of State's office about dealing with that in the future. But obviously, we're limited to the 10-day rule. We have to start at 12:01 on 10 days after the election, but they give us until 3. Now, pending the number of provisional ballots, that can be really simple or not. So something to think about for futures. Karen, would you like to talk about the statewide VLM postcard mailer that will be going out?
Okay, so the voter list maintenance, the state will be sending out postcards that will go out no later than Monday, the 17th of May. So they could go out a little sooner, but they will have to go out by then. And so then people are going to be getting a postcard that says, that basically, do you live here? And if you do live there, you don't have to do anything about it. If you don't live there, or somebody gets this card and it comes to your address and they don't live there, you're going to want to write on there, return to sender. And it says that on the card. It's very explanatory. And then through a series of process, if, when Tree gets her card and she keeps it, then it's fine. She won't get anything anymore. But if somebody else sends that back, the ones that are not living there, then the second card's going to be sent out and that one will be forwardable. And so the process begins, and then we'll be getting information in SVRS, the statewide voter registration website that we have, that will deal with different scenarios with these cards and the voters, which gets kind of complex on our end, but it's going to be a good way of being able to make voters who have not voted in 2 general elections, if they're active and there's not been any activity and they're not living in that place and such, then they will become inactive. So it's moving people in a different direction. But of course, if you're inactive and you vote, you're instantly active. So there's no concern to the voter, but I would highly stress that if you get a card sent to your address that that person does not live there, then please send that back to the state. And it goes to the state, not here. Just return to sender.
And I think in our upcoming presentation from the vote by mail folks, that will, why that's critical is important, is going to be manifest. Any further information on that?
I think that's all I have. Are you thinking of anything, Trey?
Hal?
Nope.
Okay.
I would say that when we sent out the letters explaining the changes in the primary in 2020, we got boxes back from mail that was undeliverable. A lot of those are probably people who moved and just never canceled their registration. One of the reasons that that's actually important is because all of the way we plan elections, the way we have to finance elections are based on our registration list. And if we have 20,000 people on that list who no longer live here, that means we have to print more ballots, we have to plan for more staffing, we have to have more precincts. So if you do move and register somewhere else, it would be nice if you let our clerk's office know that you had moved, or our registration office. The BMV is supposed to do that automatically, but I don't know how much it happens, and it would only happen if you actually moved within the state of Indiana and changed your driver's license address. And you're not required to do that for a number of years. So the roles can get augmented by people who aren't actually there. And so again, one of the nice things to do is if you move, change your voter registration, just let your previous voter registration folks know you no longer vote there.
Exactly. You don't want to be registered in 2 places, and you don't want to be registered in the wrong place.
Correct. And you want to know where you're registered so you know where to go to vote.
Karen, how does this affect the IU students?
So if they have moved from here, they really do need to get their name off the roll by just, there's a number of ways of doing it, but if you're just really leaving the state, you're going back to California or wherever, you can call us and we can send you something to sign. They also can just write a note with their signature saying, I've moved, we're no longer here, I'm no longer here. But if they have moved, which IU students move often within Bloomington, it's still important to change your voter registration so that you're in the right precinct at that time of voting. We have nothing to vote for this year, but we want to be ready for 2022.
Karen, would it help us in the long run if every spring and every fall we used our contacts at the university to remind students about the registration changes they need to make?
I'm involved with the Big Ten voter registration, voter challenge, that group, which they meet pretty much monthly. I was just in a meeting, a Zoom meeting, and I think we have another one scheduled. And they actually talk about that a lot. And so they're always trying very hard, that group, to get the information out to the students. I think they're one of our better avenues of doing that. But change of address, or if they're moving, they're very aware of that. And we do talk about it at that meeting. But maybe there's another group that I don't know about. Maybe you know.
We might reach out to the student union. We might reach out to some of the other student organizations just to pass on that message in the spring when people are moving away, and in the fall when people are coming back but living somewhere differently than they did the previous year.
That would also apply to just residents of the county. There's a lot of movement that happens around here. Just look at the property transfers that come through every week.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether there would be a way of maybe having a PSA run by some of the radio stations or television stations that we might send out once or twice a year just to remind people that keeping that list up to date is important.
Or maybe an action through the Association of Realtors, which has an office here in town, to add a reminder to their closing process.
Something to think about. And that one of the ramifications, of course, is moving is you may move to a different precinct in which, so you wouldn't necessarily be entitled to vote in your old precinct more than once after moving. There are rules that control where you can vote, and depending on when you actually moved, where you moved to, whether you're not in the same Senate districts, et cetera, could have ramifications on your ability to vote, even if you were otherwise, everything else was intact. Any further comments? Well, let's move on to our presentation. We have two guests with us today, Shelley Brown and Barbara Tully from Indiana Vote by Mail. And they're going to give us an update on vote by mail, why they think that it would be a good idea for Indiana. And let's turn that over to them at this point.
Good afternoon, Shelley. I'm a vice president for Indiana Vote by Mail, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I got involved in Vote by Mail to begin with. I worked as a poll worker in 2016 and in Hamilton County, and we had lines. The lines at my precinct were 2.5 hours long, and in other precincts in the county, they were as long as 4 hours long. And I just said, there has got to be a better way for people to vote than getting up in the morning, intending to go vote somewhere and not knowing that you're going to end up standing in line for 2.5 to 4 hours. I think that's acceptable. And that's what kind of propelled me to try to find a different way. And I ended up joining Vote by Mail.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Barbara Tully, I'm president of Indiana Vote by Mail. And the conversation that you were just having on updating voter registration, and maybe I'm speaking to an audience that already knows this, so if you guys know this, just stop me. But the VRG 14 form on the Secretary of State's website is the one that you can use to cancel registration. Students should know about that. If they're moving, it ought to be the thing that they do when they connect, contact the electric company to to turn off their electricity under their name in their apartment when they're moving. Like the VRG 14 form is the thing you need to fill out, number one. And number two, for students that move constantly, sure, they move like every 2 semesters, right? indianavoters.in.gov, it's easy enough to update their registration stuff online. So that ought to be plastered everywhere in Monroe County in particular because of the student population. So I'll stop my, and you guys probably already know that. Did somebody?
Do,
yeah.
but there are people who will be watching this at some point who don't.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then, sorry, one other point. The whole updating registration and the interface with the BMV. A couple of us from my group recently had a conversation with the head counsel of the BMV and the deputy counsel, and just asked them some questions about what that interface was, what with the BMV and the county clerk's office. And I kept saying, so the BMV registers people to vote, and they kept correcting me, and they said, no, the BMV does not register people to vote. The BMV collects information. All they do is collect information. They're not figuring out if the person is qualified to vote, if the person's presenting the right kind of ID, anything. They're just collecting information and passing it on to the county clerk's office. And then if the I hate to point fingers here because it's just not fair, but if it doesn't get updated in SVRS, then that issue may reside in the county clerk's office or in the election office in the county, not probably with the BMV. The BMV is doing a data feed to the SVRS, I think, or a Secretary of State once a day or once every other day. So we've heard anecdotally for years now that people like, I went to the BMV and it didn't update. Well, you did what you needed to do with the BMV. You probably need to call the county clerk's office.
Let me
So,
clarify a little bit there.
sure.
You are correct that they do not register them. We do that here at voter registration, but and we, as long as we get the information, they get registered.
Mhm.
Sometimes there's a missing link between the BMV and our office, and we can prove that because if it's there and we missed it, we can search for it and find it.
Right.
But if we search and that name never comes up, we never got it. And of course, then that's the problem. It works really well most of the time, but the times that it doesn't, it's because we haven't gotten the information. And
Right.
there's a solution for that. So if a person goes into the BMV and they're filling out that form to register to vote, they will get a receipt. They need to keep that receipt. And if they have that receipt and they come on election day to vote and we don't have them registered for whatever reason, we can register them at that time, hands-on, immediately. So there's never a problem with that. So the voters have a responsibility to keep that receipt, or they can also go to the indianavoters.com, which you were alluding to. If they have an Indiana driver's license, you have to have an Indiana driver's license. So even IU students, not all of them can use that.
Mhm.
They have to have the Indiana driver's license. It's based on that because we need the signature from the driver's license. But if they have that receipt, but they'll be registered. Or if they're not, we can make them registered. If they, anybody that goes any place and they think they've registered, whether, I think we're having a fair this year, I don't know. But if you had a registration, anything, a registration drive, it's very good to go to indianavoters.com and see that you are registered, and you should be getting a card in the mail, usually within 10 days. If we have thousands of them, sometimes we get a little bit behind on that. So depending on it, it gets crazy, or it could be faster than the 10 days. And see if your name is there, if you're registered, or at the very least, call us and we can double check to make sure that you are registered. So there is some responsibility for the voters. Sometimes there's a missing link between the BMV and us, but so if any of those things are done, you're going to be registered, but always check. It's always
Right.
good.
Yeah,
that-
whether you do it through the BMV or whether you do it anywhere else, it's just a good idea to check it, and you should recheck it before every election, actually before every voter registration cutoff,
Mhm.
just to make sure things happen.
That's right. That's right. I agree with everything that you said. That's awesome. So I'm going to share just a short PowerPoint that explains how vote by mail works. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and go to slideshow from beginning. And I'm going to minimize this. So Indiana vote by mail has been around for, 5 years now. And really, we advocate for any reforms that are going to make it easier for people to vote while keeping elections safe and secure, and introducing cost-effective reforms, and moving to a system of hand-marked paper ballots, because we know that's the absolute safest thing that you could possibly do. So I'm going to talk about the guts of what vote by mail is, and this is how it makes it different than absentee voting. And I know that there were, we had this nice email from Hal when he and Shelley communicated about us presenting at this meeting. And he presented some objections. And one of them was, every registered voter receives a ballot automatically a few weeks prior to the election. So we can talk about that at the end. But in vote by mail states, every registered voter gets sent a ballot automatically. They don't have to apply for it. They don't have to request it. It comes. There's a barcode. I have it in that little box at the bottom on the envelope. An intelligent mail barcode on the inbound and outbound ballot envelopes. And that barcode is assigned to each voter for that election. The ballot barcode, the envelope barcode, allows for ballot tracking by election staff. And it also allows the voter to sign up for tracking themselves, so they know, oh, the ballot's been sent to me. Oh, I had a notice that the ballot was sent to me, but it's now a week later and I still haven't received it. I need to contact the election office and get another one sent to me. The barcode gets voided, a new barcode is assigned to the voter, and then another ballot gets sent out. The voter can also get voter verification when the ballot is either dropped off, put in a drop box, or put in the mail and actually reaches the central count location. Oh, I see that they've gotten my ballot. Terrific. And then the next stage is my envelope has passed, my signature on the envelope has passed signature verification, and now the ballot's headed to tabulation. We saw examples of these kinds of envelopes that are pictured here when we visited Orange County, California, and Denver, Colorado last Super Tuesday, Monday the 2nd, and Super Tuesday the 3rd of March. And they use exactly these kind of envelopes. The standard for USPS can handle any size envelope, but we've seen the 6x9 envelope seems to be more standard. The swoosh is used on Indiana election mail, official Indiana election mail, but what's missing is the intelligent mail barcode. Now, in conversations with some counties in Indiana, if they use a mailing service, I know that on the inbound from the voter back to the election office, if they use a mailing service, that mailing service will put a barcode on it, but they're not fully using, the election office in some of these counties are not fully using, you know, the intelligent mail barcode or some other kind of barcoding service that allows it to be tracked on the outbound to the voter and the inbound back. And then the color stripe down the side is optional. It's not required, but it does make it stand out in terms of handling when it gets back to a central count location, or if it's on its way out. So you could use different colors. It's just what the example is here, but the outbound to the voter could be brown and the inbound from the voter back to the election office could be green or something, just so it stands out visually. It's a best practice. The other thing that you'll notice about this, and I should actually insert on this slide a picture of the back of the envelope, is lots of white space. So just in order to provide clear instructions to voters, lots of white space on an envelope with not a whole ton of words. And I live in Marion County, and I have worked elections, and I know a lot about how elections are administered. And I had to sit down and make sure I was doing exactly the right thing on that envelope when I got to do it for the primary in June. But lots of white space. There is actually an organization, a not-for-profit organization called the Center for Civic Design that provides lots of free resources that talk about best practices in terms of envelope design and ballot design and communications to voters and tons of other things in election administration. I'll cover that at the end. This is kind of the guts of vote by mail, and what makes it vote by mail and not simply absentee voting is, number one, the voter doesn't have to request it, and number two, it has a barcode that's assigned to the voter, which allows it to be tracked. This is what it looks like when people return their ballots, and we sometimes call it vote at home, not vote by mail. And the reason why we use those terms interchangeably is because most voters in vote by mail states don't actually return them in the mail. They get the ballots in the mail that get sent to their homes, but they don't actually return them by mail. They return them in official ballot drop boxes, which are prolific in vote by mail states. And these things look very, very different than a post office box. So if a person wanted to use an official ballot drop box, they could certainly drop it in the mail too, but most people don't. They either walk it into a vote center on election day or early voting period, or drop it in the drop box. The ones in in Orange County are, I think they had, I forget how many ballot drop boxes they had throughout the county. They might have had, I'm going to misstate this. They might have had 100 drop boxes. Does that sound right, Shelley? It's a pretty big county.
That's right.
Yeah, 1.8 million registered voters. So they have as many registered voters in Orange County, California as the entire state of Utah. Anyway, those ballot drop boxes are located outside of government buildings, libraries, often in places where there are cameras on them. They always try to locate them in places where there are cameras on them. There's fire detection, fire suppression technology built into the one in the picture on the left, so that if somebody tried to put an incendiary device in that, it would not destroy the other ballots in there. The slot that the ballots go in is very, very narrow. So somebody would have to, if they had a whole bunch of ballots and we're going to feed them into the slot, they would have to stand there for a while and feed each one in individually. All these vote at home states have limits on the number of ballots that can be returned by a person. The one in Denver, the smaller one in Denver on the right, was one that we saw on Super Tuesday. It was outside a library that was acting as a vote center, and that is permanently affixed to the ground. It's got a camera on it. You know, ballot drop boxes are actually pretty easy to use, but we can't do that in Indiana. When ballots get returned, however they get returned, doesn't matter whether it's mail, drop off, in a drop box, whatever, they go to a central count location. So we can see that tray of envelopes have the blue bar down them. So if one was a different color, that would stick out to somebody to go, wait a minute, this is the wrong piece of mail that's mixed in here. And then they go through this high-speed Bell and Howell scanner that is taking an image of the back of the ballot envelope. That is high speed. So that sleeve of envelopes that's in there in that scanner right now would take just a couple minutes to go through. I mean, it's very high speed. It's taking an image of the back of the envelope where the signature is. That image is ingested into software. And then that software ends up matching that voter's signature to other examples of their signature. And then election workers, it's not being done by software, it's being done by people. Election workers are just sitting at the computer screens and they pull up, you know, John Smith, so the next one in their queue to work, and they see John Smith's signature, and they see an example of other times he's voted or his signature from the BMV or whatever. But they see one example of the signature and they say yes or no. If they're not sure, they have a chance to, in the software, go and pull up additional examples of the person's signature. And then they say yes or no. So if I'm sitting there as an election worker and I reject that signature, it goes to another queue and it ends up in Shelley's queue. And Shelley doesn't know that I've rejected the signature. She just knows she has an item in her work queue to work, and she looks at it and she says yes or no. And if it still gets rejected, it goes on to a second tier review bipartisan team that then looks at it together, a Democrat and a Republican look at it together and decide if it's a good example or not a good example. So for states that have been doing vote by mail for a while, and if you take the example of Oregon, which has been doing it for 20 years, you know, you've got multiple examples and a growing database of examples of a voter's signature. So what often gets thrown out to us when we talk to people is, well, my signature doesn't look anything like it did when I registered to vote. It probably is more alike than you realize if you do some, forensic handwriting analysis training. But basically, it's this growing database of signatures from every time you voted, anytime you've interfaced with the BMV, your voter registration. And that's incredibly hard. When you've got a database of a person's signature over time, that's incredibly hard to commit fraud. Somebody is not going to be able to easily or handily commit fraud in a situation where they have to duplicate somebody's signature and not have it fall out of the parameters of a historical database of examples of signature. There is a cure process in vote by mail states for signature discrepancies or missing signatures. We now have a cure process in place in Indiana due to a lawsuit last year by Common Cause that said you can't just toss out ballots if it's missing or the signature discrepant, signature is discrepant. I think many county election offices would actually try to do something about that, but realize that Indiana had no legal, official, legislated cure process in place. We do now, as of this legislative session, and as a result of that lawsuit last year. But in vote by mail states, what happens is, you know, if I decided John Smith's, you know, signature didn't match and it ended up in Shelley's queue and she decided it didn't match either, and then it goes to a bipartisan review team and they decide it doesn't match, then the voter gets a notice. And if the voter responds to that notice and, you know, in the ways just described in the letter to them about ways to fix this discrepancy, you know, then it's fine. If the voter ignores it, they get a second one. If they ignore the second one, they get a third one. And if they get a third one and don't respond, it goes to the DA because it could be a case of voter fraud. So this is taken very, very seriously in vote by mail states in terms of that signature review process. And it works very, very well.
Yeah, Barbara,
Yes.
do you want us to hold questions to the end or ask as we go through?
If this isn't a very long presentation, it's probably easier to ask them at the end, if that's okay with you.
Will do.
Okay. So the ones that, you know, in most signatures, most envelopes, the signature gets accepted. So a vast majority of these envelopes, the signature gets accepted. So then it has to go on to tabulation. I'm going to stop for a second and talk to you about ballot tracking. So Ballot Tracks is a service, one of the services that's used for ballot tracking. And again, this is election staff can track ballots and see where they are in the process, and voters can sign up for text and email alerts. There are several services out there. There's probably there's 3 or 4 or 5 services out there that allow that barcode to be used for ballot tracking by election staff and by voters to give them confidence in the results of the election and know that their ballot was counted. So after the signature is verified, you know, the envelopes go through a splitting machine and an operator pulls the ballot out of the envelope. Once that ballot is extracted from the envelope, that ballot is completely anonymous and not associated with the voter anymore. And then the folks on the right in the top and bottom pictures are just, you know, unfolding the ballot, making sure there's not a rip or a staple or a tear, or, you know, they're just preparing, they're stacking up ballots and, you know, and going to send them through the tabulation process. So things that Indiana needs to work on, we need consistent and continual voter roll cleanup. So vote at home states do a better job than Indiana does in constantly updating their voter rolls. They use something called ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center, which is not a national voter database, but it is a way for states that are ERIC members to share information so they can see if there's duplicate registrations. And that is an organization that is governed by the member states, and it's 31 states in Washington, DC. Indiana, by the way, passed a law 2 sessions ago that said we could never join something like ERIC. The envelope design, as I talked about, lots of clear white space and clear directions for voters. The ballot design needs to be easy for voters to follow. And then dead voters, so don't think I'm talking about voters that are dead that get sent ballots, because that should never happen. But people who legitimately vote absentee, they requested an absentee ballot, they voted it, and they sent it back in, but then they happen to die before election day. There are a number of states that, because this is such a small number of voters, there are a number of states that will just process those ballots anyway because the voter's intent was to vote and the signature has been verified. In Indiana, we have to try to take those out, which is why that tabulation before election day is problematic. Because vote at home states go through everything that I just showed you in the previous slides, you know, picking up from the ballot drop boxes daily, you know, getting the US mail daily, picking up ballots that have been returned to vote centers daily, and processing them all the way through, scanning the ballot to tabulate the election, but they don't total the election until polls close on election day. In Indiana, I'm not sure how this early tabulation is going to work, because we were talking to the Indiana Election Division about it the other day, Shelley and I were, and we're like, well, how's that going to work? Because the ballot is still going to need to be associated with the envelope. So how is that scanning going to take place and going to save time? And there was an amendment that was introduced to deal with this dead voter issue, somebody who legitimately votes and then happens to die before election day. And that never made it out of committee. I just talked about keeping voter rolls clean. So it's also the frequency of updates, and it's also the number of tools that vote at home states use. So I talked about ERIC, the National Change of Address, which is a USPS service, excuse me, Social Security death records, and then in-state databases like the BMV and the Department of Revenue, but it's continual. It has to be continual. And then this last slide is some organizations that can help election administrators. And there are tons, these are really, really good websites. So the Center for Civic Design, and I've put the link in here for these organizations, and the Center for Tech and Civic Life, awesome online resources that talk about reaching the most number of voters as possible, communicating to voters, giving clear direction to voters to minimize mistakes by voters, and how to run a really tight election and a safe election and a cost-effective election. And then there's the USPS, I know that's the 2020 election mail toolkit, but that is about how to implement the intelligent mail barcode. As it turns out, Marion County came to us a few weeks ago and said, hey, can you put us in touch with some resources that have implemented intelligent mail barcode? And we got them in touch with the folks in Denver who have implemented that, 8-9 years ago. And now they're talking to Denver about how to implement intelligent mail barcode so that they can track election mail and have this working relationship with the post office. So that is the last slide, and I'm going to stop my share and we can take questions, and Shelley and I will be glad to answer any questions you might have. I will tell you, just to pull up one little bit of information. So Utah is one of the newest vote by mail states. Utah is a redder than red state. They have 1.8 million voters. There are 3 times more Republicans than Democrats in Utah. You can register by party. And so they have a couple small parties, but Republican, Democrat, and then you can also register as unaffiliated, where you don't declare a party, and about 30% of Utah voters are unaffiliated. And we are 60% larger. Indiana we have 4.7 million voters. They have 1.8 million. And Utah, as a state, went vote by mail 2 years ago, and then Montana and Arizona, about 70% of their voters have signed up to be on a permanent absentee list. So you have to apply for an absentee ballot, but you do it once if you check the box that says, I always want my ballot mailed to me. And then they get mailed. Nebraska and North Dakota also, fairly red states, and they have moved toward expanding mailed voting. And then Oregon and Washington, 2 of the earliest states that did vote by mail, while they're considered to be blue leaning, they both have Republican secretaries of state right now that were elected under the vote by mail model and like vote by mail. So, there's a lot of support for vote by mail in some sectors. And I think if you listen to the national noise, it can water down, what we're hearing and what the facts are. And it works very well in many jurisdictions and people love it.
Shelley, I have a couple of questions. Number one, you mentioned that when the ballots are received, they're fed in, and the machine doesn't automatic, or the scanner doesn't automatic verification of signature, and then there's a human verification. Is that done on a percentage of the total, or is that a random percentage of humans who actually verify the signatures?
So most vote by mail states use human verification. The machine isn't verifying the signature; it's taking a picture of the envelope.
Okay,
where the signature is. And then it is that image is being ingested into software. So where that Bell and Howell scanner was, when I took that picture, I could have turned around and bumped into people that were sitting in computer terminals. They're just sitting there like work in a queue of things, but it looks like people sitting at computer terminals. There's like nothing to show you. But that is done by people. All the signature
Okay.
verification is done by people.
Okay, good. So in the case where there's an exact match of signature, that would be a human verification done. And an exact match is a red flag to me because it says somebody could have photocopied it and imprinted it. Okay. That's good. That's all I had for questions.
Is there a situation where, say, a first-time registrant would not have a signature on file? And how would the system deal with that?
Well, let me think about that. They would have had to sign something to register, and that would be in the system.
So it'd either be their driver's license through, well, what about people? Well, actually, you have to have a driver's license to register online, correct?
Yes, you do.
Social
But
Security number?
it has happened that for whatever reason, occasionally we'll have a voter with no signature.
So in that sort of situation, we would have to go through the cure process where they would get their notice and
Yeah.
send it back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Miss Barbara, thank you for being here, number one, and thank you for your time.
Very
Um,
good.
My question was about in the primary. If everybody receives a ballot, what do you send in the primary?
Good question.
Well, so that's the other problem in Indiana because we don't have to register by party, right? In voted.
But people change their mind too. Every election, somebody say, well, you know what? I dislike this person so much that I'm going to vote for the other side.
Or the individuals in Utah that are not affiliated with the party, they in effect could choose between parties depending upon their candidate wishes. So
Right.
So how's that solved?
Go ahead, Shelley.
Well, yeah, so you can have all of the different ballots sent. So you could have a Republican and a Democrat and an independent ballot, and the voter is only allowed to return one of them. If they
Right.
open the ballot and there's more than one in there, it invalidates that vote because they're only allowed to vote for one.
That
So,
would up the cost. Yeah.
Well, if most people, so in Orange County, California, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think this is directionally correct. Most voters are affiliated with one of the major parties or another, or some other minor party. There are not that many unaffiliated voters. It's only the unaffiliated voters that get multiple ballots and get the instructions to return only one of the ballots that they've been sent. It's not
right.
all voters.
Right. In addition to that, let's say you're registered as a Democrat and you get a Democratic ballot and you don't want it, you can take it in and exchange it for whatever. If you decide you want to flip, it's like Tree was talking about.
But you would have, then you've wasted that ballot and we don't have that choice because either you're going to vote Democratic or Republican in the primary. And you wouldn't want to send both ballots to everybody.
And it would also negate the whole point of voting by mail for people who can't get into the into the office.
Yeah.
Is they would have to go into the office. So that
Okay, my second question is, let's say that a person returns their ballot and we receive it at Election Central 2 days before the election. It's not signed. I don't have the time now to get that ballot back to that person to sign. What do you do at the end? Or this just a lost ballot, or how's that?
No, that's part of the cure process. So missing or discrepant signatures go through the cure process, and it's different for a missing signature versus a discrepant signature. But different states will do it in different counties. States, it's state law, will do it in different ways. So if it's a missing signature, I forget what it was in Orange County, Shelley. I don't know if you remember, but there were multiple ways that you could provide, a copy of your ID or come in with a copy of your ID or
But
provide.
how does the voter know this? You have to notify
They
the
would
voter?
get a notice. They would get a notice.
How?
It's up to a number of days, 10 days or something like that after the election. What should be happening.
Okay, so the election's not called that night then. So we can't give out final results on election night because we have things out there pending.
That's right.
Well,
additional ballot.
That's a problem.
so we were sitting in the Denver election office in downtown Denver on Super Tuesday. And, you know, their polls closed at 7 p.m. And at 7:01 or 02, whatever p.m., they were releasing results because most of their ballots, were mailed to voters and then returned in drop boxes or at vote centers. And they had already dealt with the very few number of, you know, they start, as soon as a ballot comes back, if it's 2 weeks before the election and it's a missing signature, they've sent the notice out to the voter already, and it may have been resolved by then. But the ones that end up being discrepant or missing signatures is actually a very, very small number. So everybody knows when election offices release preliminary results at poll closing, everybody knows they're preliminary. You know, it's not the final count until the election gets certified. So
we're already sending those notices out to people that need signatures, but the time span is a problem.
mhm, mhm.
And did our Secretary of State say that we can have drop boxes or not have drop boxes? It was
We do
very
not have drop
contentious.
boxes in Indiana.
So how would we do the drop boxes in Indiana if the Secretary of State says we can't have them?
Well, it's just not built into election law, and there were amendments introduced in the House and Senate elections
But
committees.
they were voted down, correct?
Right,
They were voted
Okay.
down. They were voted down, yes.
yeah.
So Indiana would basically require a fair number of election changes before
Yeah.
anything like this could be instituted.
Absolutely.
But to get back to the signature discrepancy issue, so, or the issue of signatures that were a problem several days before. One is, if we don't have a phone number and email, contacting them by mail could be a problem,
Mhm.
especially if mail was delayed. But those ballots would presumably be treated like provisional ballots at that point. And that might also,
Until the signature is cured or provided, it's not counted at all. The envelope isn't opened.
Right.
well, but I mean, in terms of, they would be treated in the same way as provisional ballots. That we'd have to have a something that said, you have up until this point to fix this.
Correct,
It
correct.
Might be
Yes,
the same as the provisional ballot deadline,
correct.
which would give them time after the election to fix it, but not, months.
Right, that's right. So I will tell you that Shelley and I are planning another trip out west. I mean, we went to, with another member of our group, we went to Orange County, California and Denver, Colorado on March 2nd and March 3rd. And we were in their election offices all day. It was kind of nerdy, but it was a little bit fun because we really learned a lot. Shelley and I are planning another trip to Utah for their November 2nd election, and hopefully Washington State. And I would encourage people who are a little bit skeptical, if there's a way that you could go see a process like that, just seeing what they go through and being able to answer your questions like live come with us for our November 2nd trip if you want to, like, just tell us. I mean, we couldn't pay for it because that's not legal, but seeing the process and actually talking to election administrators in those places and asking your very detailed questions is, if you're a visual learner or not, it's just hugely instructive in terms of really understanding the rigorous controls they have in place to make sure that these elections are safe. There's a lot of organizations that publish things about election fraud. The Heritage Center has said, most vote by mail states have about the same or even less amount of voter fraud as, traditional voting states. And the Brennan Center says, when there's fraud, it's mostly just mistakes, kind of clerical errors and bad data matching and stuff like that. It's not because somebody, had the intent to try to, swing votes or whatever. So, the thing that in vote by mail that we talk about is what you have with a vote by mail ballot is a hand marked paper ballot. In many places in Indiana, like Hamilton County where Shelley is located,
Yes.
they use direct recording electronic machines. That is all electronic. There is nothing that the voter gets to touch and go feed into a tabulator like you have in Monroe County and like I've got in Marion County. And so that is, election experts have said for a away from that, that's not safe, that's not safe. I mean, there's like, I'm not going to go into the details about that. We could talk about that another time. But, and you know, the election security experts even have kind of said what we have in Marion County, you guys have in Monroe County, is probably not the best either. Let's go back to hand marked paper ballots, because if you have to audit an election, you know the voter touched it and they checked a box or filled in a bubble or whatever. So that's why we like vote by mail. You know, you get the ballot and you get to sit at your kitchen table with your cat in your lap and you just fill out your ballot and then you get it sent back in and you don't wait in line for however many hours.
Right, wait, Monroe County is a paper ballot county, totally.
So that,
But you have optical scan machines. Do you feed them into a micro vote machine, a blank ballot into a micro vote machine? Okay, that's what we've got.
No, we are a paper ballot county, pen to paper, we're heart.
Good.
We feel like that is the safest way to
It
vote.
is.
Of course,
Yes.
if you have a disability, we do have the ADA machines,
Right.
but other than that, we're 100% paper ballots.
And we
That's
love that.
awesome. That's
But
awesome.
it's interesting at conferences, we do get pushback and, you know, we're old fashioned and
They make fun of us.
they do, they really make fun, but we love them and are the only way that we're comfortable.
Well, I mean, you know, in Monroe County, you could actually audit an election by going back and pulling
Oh,
a
yeah.
sampling of
We do.
physical ballots. In
We do.
Hamilton County, where Shelley is, you can't do that. What are you going to go back to? It's in a machine.
Agreed.
Right.
And we can
you
back
know,
it up.
I think this is directionally correct. 40% or more, I think it's more than that, might be over 50% of Indiana voters are in counties that have these all electronic machines.
I would guess it's
I mean,
even higher.
seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess if we had to weigh in, or would we want to be 100% mail the ballot out to everyone registered to vote? I would say no. I would say no across the board.
I agree.
I hear crickets.
I love it, and I would like the option. And I will tell you that if you know somebody in one of the vote by mail states, if you ask them how do they like it, they're just about guaranteed that they really like it. And then as a poll worker, I have people coming through from the vote by mail states, and they're like, "What the heck? I want my ballot in the mail." So if you've used it and experienced it, generally people really like it. And the other thing, one thing we haven't talked about, somebody said something about primary elections. We have the worst turnout in primary elections. When you think about, that's one of the biggest decisions that we make. You know, if you're in a county, Hamilton County, that's mostly Republican, or it's virtually all Republican, the primary is the election. And in order to get turnout, it should be voting by mail, sending ballots in the mail is one of the best ways to improve turnout, so that more people get involved, because we potentially end up with a candidate who's maybe more extreme left or extreme right, because their friends and the people that are super engaged in the process are the ones that vote, and the people that are more in the middle don't vote because they're. So I think that voting by mail, especially, and the other one is municipal elections. We have such a poor turnout, and you guys probably do too. It's maybe 20%, maybe 30% if you're lucky. And so a very small number of people are electing people that represent us at the local level. And it's, for me, just unacceptable. And one of the best ways to improve the turnout is through vote by mail.
Just because something is liked, though, does not tell me that it's the best. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so
Like
it was
the
funny.
thing that's best.
Yeah, no, I understand. But it was interesting when the ballots came out in the primary, where everybody was able to get a ballot. I started getting phone calls from people. Hey, do you know anything about this person? What do you know about that person? Well, what do you know about this person? And we were able to discuss what did we know about these people and what we thought about these people.
I can understand that the signature
The
verification is a
research, you know, a lot of people.
critical step, because there isn't every time you vote, your ID gets presented. If you're doing vote at home, like Indiana does now, you have to essentially have an ID to vote in person and have it count. And so the signature verification is a critical process because you're not showing an ID
Right,
each time you're voting in person.
correct.
And there's a lot of equipment to make that happen.
Couple of other questions. One is there a situation or is there a provision in vote by mail states where if somebody can't vote by mail, that they vote? Do they still have election day precincts voting, and how do they deal with
So
that?
they have vote centers. So in vote by mail states, they have not done away with the ability to vote in person. So in vote by mail states, you could be mailed a ballot to your home and make the choice to go, for whatever reason, doesn't matter why, to go and vote in person. So, you know, you go and sign in and whatever, show your ID, whatever you have to do. And then the vote center invalidates the barcode associated with the ballot that you were mailed if you don't physically turn it in. That barcode gets invalidated in case somehow it got sent in. And then you just vote in person. So
And
there's that choice to vote that way.
if you already voted in person or voted by mail, can you still vote in person in those states, or would they basically say you've already voted and that's it?
If it's the first one they've received. So in vote by mail states, because they're processing those ballots right away when they get them, like on a daily basis, it's the first one they've received. So if you voted by mail and then you go try to vote in person, you know, if that's already processed, it's going to get caught. They're going to say, no, you've already voted. We can't help you.
Couple of other questions. So one is, what about people who, for reasons of physical disability, whatever, can't handle a standard vote by mail ballot? I know that there's at least 2 lawsuits out there right now that are dealing with people who are blind, who either are dealing with travel board and you know, don't want to have to give their choices to in front of people, or you know, who say that the ballot's discriminatory because say they can't read it. How do they deal with those?
So there are a couple different technology solutions that allow disabled voters to vote with confidence and confidentially in the privacy of their homes. Of course, when we were in Colorado and Orange County, we couldn't see any of those solutions. We were told about those solutions. I don't remember enough of the details about them. Shelley, do you?
No, I don't, but I want to make the point that regardless of whether you have a vote by mail system or you don't, you need that technology. And it's something that lasts and something that Indiana needs regardless of whether we ever go to with vote by mail.
I'm curious about something. In states where, or counties where you have to opt in to vote at home, what are the demographics of the typical ones who opt in? Younger, older, recent moving in?
You mean where you have to apply for a ballot? Or each time, or were you?
Talking about
Well, forgive me. I thought, I mean, there were 2 things you were talking about, I thought, but maybe I'm wrong. You have one where you just blanket send out There are states that blanketly send out ballots to everybody. And there are others, I thought you said, that you have to opt in.
It's a permanent absentee list. Yeah. So there are states.
That's what I'm interested in demographically. Do we have a clue of who the opt-in?
Well, you know, in Arizona and let's see, Arizona and Montana, 70% of voters are mailed their ballots as permanent absentee voters. And I have to think that's across all demographics. Now we know Arizona is kind of a retirement state. So where lots of folks go to retire, but 70% of their voters are permanent absentee voters. So they don't have to continue to apply for a ballot.
Yeah, I understand that.
And Montana's the same. So, you know, I'd say it's across all demographics.
So
Okay.
their opt-in is either get a ballot by mail or not get a ballot by mail. There are no restrictions on who can apply.
Right. Well, Indiana is one of the only states
Yeah.
that still has excuses in place.
You have to have a reason, yeah.
Right. But we're only one of about 4 or 5 states that still have
Lots
those
of
reasons.
changes needed to be able to implement even a portion of this.
Right. Well, right.
Yeah.
And so just realize that states that move to vote by mail do not do it all in one fell swoop with one bill that goes through their state legislature. They do it incrementally. They put intelligent mail barcode on and ballot tracking, so they kind of get voters used to that. They've removed the excuses. They've built permanent absentee lists. They have, they figured out how to do this signature comparison more efficiently. I mean, you kind of gradually implement these things. You don't do it all in one fell swoop because number one, election staff has to get used to dealing with these changes. And number two, you got to get the voters to get used to these changes so more people participate in the process. So it's not a kind of a one and done thing. It's gradual and incremental. Most of these states have been moving to this over a period of time. It takes a long time, but there's a lot of resistance in Indiana to do things that make voting easier. I mean, what we heard when we were in Orange County and Denver was very voter-centric practices is what they were after. Very voter-centric practices. Keep the elections safe and secure, keep them cost-effective, and make it very voter-centric, very voter-friendly, so that more people get engaged in the process.
When it does slowly
Right,
overstep.
and so that-
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just have one more question. We know of some different counties that occasionally will experiment with other ways to mark ballots, so it won't be a statewide activity. I'm curious about this. I understand the progressive decisions that lead to vote at home. I understand that, and that makes perfect sense. Do we know whether when states actually go through those steps, is it always a statewide step, or are there lead counties, experimental?
So in Nebraska in 2018, the legislature put in place the ability for a few Nebraska counties that chose to do a pilot.
Okay, makes sense.
And those counties, they put the legal framework in place for a couple counties to try it. And it's a non-presidential year and it's a primary on top of it, right? And so people know that voter turnout's going to be low. We're not alone in that.
Makes sense.
And those 2 counties, and I don't remember, but they were a couple more populous counties, I believe. Those 2 counties in Nebraska had much higher voter turnout for that primary than the other counties. So the other counties were like, whoa, wait a minute, we want in on this. How did you do this? So that's the way, I mean, I've talked to legislators about allowing a pilot. We got to remove some barriers first.
Yeah, and now Nebraska has 11 counties that voted at home in 2020.
Which frankly was most of their voting population because Nebraska has great big fields of no people at all, right? So it's 11 counties, Shelley, but it's most of their voting population.
Yeah, and then
Hey.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Miss Shelley. It's wonderful that you two liked vote at home, but what does the voters of Monroe County want to do? I think they have an opinion too. Agreed?
Well, right, but again, just because we're suggesting a vote at home system doesn't mean that people have to. That doesn't mean people can't go and vote in person if they want to.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
good, because I still want to give the voter
Yeah,
that
you never take
opportunity.
that opportunity.
Yeah, it never takes away the right to vote in person. It never takes away. What happens over time though, and so don't get freaked out about this, but what happens over time is, when ballots get mailed to everybody, election administrators start looking at the number of precincts that there are, or vote centers, or the most efficient way to go. But the number of places that they're staffing for the early voting period and on election day. And they look at the usage of each of those centers. And then they go, well, wait a minute. I mean, there's this declining usage because less people are showing up to vote in person because they're using the ballot that we mailed to them. And so over time,
I think it's going to be over time. Agree.
over
time.
it means you end up reducing. I mean, that's how Colorado saved 40% of its election costs. It was in equipment and in a fewer number of polling locations that they needed.
So you might be looking at more money initially, but eventually you would think that there would be additional savings.
Correct. That's correct.
A lot of the voting restriction laws that have been going into effect over the last few months are targeting vote by mail. Would you like to talk about that?
Well, we think it's sad. I don't have a very pat answer to that. I find it really sad that there's people that are trying to disenfranchise voters. It feels like voter disenfranchisement. We are a nonpartisan organization. We want everyone. I don't care whether they're green and purple striped or I don't care. I just don't care. I want everybody. Our organization wants everybody to have an equal access to vote. Sending people ballots opens that up to more people, brings more people into the process if they choose to use it. Voting, the method of voting should not be a partisan game at all. We need to have voter friendly practices in Indiana so more people vote, that more people vote in our municipal elections because they're almost more important than the national elections. And we just need to pull more people into the process, which is our whole goal. I don't care if somebody votes Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, I don't care. I just want more people in Indiana to vote. We pat ourselves on the back for our voter turnout in the general election, which was 65%. We were still the 42nd state in terms of voter turnout. You know what states were in the top 10 states? The vote at home states. For the June primary, now I understand it was a big cluster last year because people, the date was moved and then there were, it was just kind of a mess last year. Anyway, 24% of our voters turned out to vote in the primary last June. That's abysmal in a presidential year. We should be ashamed.
All right, I have a question. So you're saying this is a nonpartisan vote by mail group?
Correct, yes.
Do you know if it is more Democratic, are more the members Democratic or more Republican? Because I've heard that statement said before, not with this group, but with another group, different groups that say they're nonpartisan or bipartisan, and they really aren't. Can this really be proven that it really is? You see Democrats as well as Republicans in this group?
We don't poll individual, and we're actually a very, very small group. So we don't poll members to see how we feel, but we don't talk about politics at our meetings. That's not what we're about. We're all about voting access and vote by mail and getting the message out to people and combating misinformation. I will tell you that many studies have been done, and if you want to see those resources, I would have to email you separately, but many studies have been done about whether vote by mail benefits one party over another. And all the studies that I've read point to, in vote by mail states, there is not one party advantage over another. It's not like, oh, all the Democrats wanted to vote by mail. And in fact, there was a study that was just released, I think last month. It's one of the first academic studies on the 2020 general election. And for the whole country, not for individual pockets, but for the whole country, it actually skewed slightly in favor of Republicans for the mail ballots. So there is not a partisan advantage to using vote by mail. We're not a partisan team. We don't support candidates. We talk about issues. We don't support or, not support certain candidates. We keep our focus on the issues.
Again, I've heard those same words in a different concept or different group. But it hasn't been true. So I would like to see that study that it really doesn't affect, is it one party or the other? And sometimes we don't have to talk about, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? But we do know often just how we hang around each other or whatever. So in a group, often we know if it does lean to one direction or the other. So that was my question. Thanks.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see those results, one. And two, also to know if in states that are all vote by mail,
Mhm.
if there is a difference in how that skews versus in states where you have to apply and so forth. I don't know whether those studies have looked at that, but it might be that in a state where everybody votes by mail, there's things go one way, and in other states maybe it's different depending on how you have to do it. So I'd like to see those studies as well.
Okay.
And I'd like to receive the overheads that you showed during this. So I don't know if there can be a central place that some of those might be shared and with.
I can send it all. I can send it to Carolyn.
Okay,
I actually have it, Sherry. I'll send it to you after the meeting.
thank you.
And Barbara and Shelley, if people are interested in learning more about your organization and what you do and how you do it, how do they get a hold of your organization?
So we can be reached through our website, indianavotebymail.org, or indianavotebymail@gmail.
Mhm. Great.
I'd actually like to take a moment, if the board has no further questions, to allow the other people who are on this call to maybe ask a question or to chime in. So if you raise your hands, our tech services person can unmute you and allow you to ask that question, or you could put it in the chat. I don't see anybody raising their hands. Check participants here. So I think the only people with their hands still up are Sherry and Tree. Okay, if there are no further questions, and certainly people who see this presentation later, we'd be happy if you will send us those questions, and we can refer them on and get you answers back as well. But there may be people not watching this today who have those questions who will be watching this meeting later on CATS. In that case, one, I would really like to thank Barb and Shelley for coming and giving us a very interesting presentation and a lot to think about.
Thank you for having us. We certainly
Yes,
appreciate the
thank you for
time.
having us.
And you're welcome to stick around for the next discussion or not, as you care to.
Well, probably I'll drop off, but I will encourage you. We'll leave the open invitation for a Utah and Washington trip for November 2nd election. If anybody wants to go and actually see how this works, especially someone that's a skeptic. Like, I think that Karen is maybe a little skeptic, but it would be great if I could get you out there with us to show us that, show you how it
Come
works.
on, join us.
Yeah.
I also wanted to comment that I often go to the Hamilton County Election Board meetings, which are very infrequent. And you guys have so much participation. I'm so impressed, because we usually have maybe one or two outside people that show up for our meetings, maybe. And seeing all these different people on, I'm so encouraged by how much engagement you have in your community with your election board. Congratulations.
All these meetings are also, they're recorded and put up on our CATS TV website so that people can watch them after the meeting. Not everybody can obviously attend at 1 p.m. on a Thursday.
Yep.
Or if we're really motivated, we can rewatch them.
That too.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to move on now to our potential voter fraud allegation.
Did you want to pass on looking at the document.
We can do, actually, let's do that now,
Okay.
and then we'll move on to that
Okay.
last topic.
This will be very brief. And I want to thank Sherry for working with me on this so that we could come up with a potential draft to forward to the board, which has already been done, and eventually with corrections to forward this on to the attorney for his or her approval. The first page is basically just a cheat sheet on election law violations to give untrained or people unfamiliar with election law an idea of what is and is not allowed. And laws being written the way they are, this is what's not allowed. So it covers the book as it was for the 2020 election. Of course, that book gets upgraded every time there's a law change. So this list will be dynamic as well. And question? No? Okay, someone's microphone is open. Okay. Since we're going to put all these people through training, and since training sometimes doesn't stick as well as we'd like to, here's the exact procedure people need to follow when there is a potential violation or something happens that disturbs them and they think it might be a violation. They need to understand what's going on. If they believe there is a violation, then they need to explain the consequences to the potential violator. And then they will fill out the form. The form will be forwarded and the decision will be made by legal authorities whether this needs to be pursued or not. And the form itself is very straightforward. Who is the violator and where do they live? This is what we were lacking in 2020, and it's a lesson I'll never forget. All the basic information we can get about them, what happened, who witnessed it, who was in charge that day to kind of act as a co-signer on this, and what the potential violator is saying was their reason for doing it and their justification, and their reaction to when they were told that this is a potential violation of the law and it could be a misdemeanor or even a felony violation. And then all the relevant people would be invited to sign this. And that's basically the form. It's a quick 4 pages. And all the members of the election board have a copy of this, and so does Karen, the election supervisor. So I invite all of you to review this, come up with any changes you'd like to make, and then we will forward this to the legal team for their final evaluation of whether this is good to go or whether it needs further adjustments. All right, any questions?
Your plan in the end would be that this would go to every leader of precincts beyond election central at absentee voting, leads at absentee voting, all of those things
Exactly.
as a guideline for how they would deal with something if it came up.
Exactly. This would be everywhere where votes are cast. This would be present. And also this would be part of the annual or election period training that would go on by the clerk's office, that everyone would have a copy of it there as well. So it'll be well distributed and hopefully well understood, so we never have a situation where someone doesn't know how to react.
The one thing that might be helpful, and maybe not necessarily on this form, but in certainly the training, would be what the consequences are. We have the code law, but if you tell somebody that they can't wear a t-shirt with the logo of their favorite candidate on it into the election site,
Right.
might have more oomph with them if they knew that there's a potential fine and jail term for that.
Yeah,
I don't know that we necessarily need to have it on this form, but that should be included with the training that.
yeah.
so
Yeah,
that-
in the case you mentioned, which would be a t-shirt or a mask with a candidate logo or a hat, that would be a Class A misdemeanor. And that's a pretty powerful punishment. So it certainly would, I think, have deterred the situation we faced last year, possibly. But people are people and they're still going to make mistakes. So this will at least give us enough information that we can make intelligent decisions at the time of the incident. Okay.
So I will invite all of our board members to give this another review. I read through it when I got it, but I didn't look at every word. Send you, Hal,
Yes.
the
That's-
potential revisions that they think should be made. And then do we want to review it again at the next board meeting, or do you want to take those revisions and just pass them through to county legal and then have the final document at our next meeting?
Barring any dramatic rewrites of the document, I would prefer just to take any corrections or additions that people have, copy the board and the relevant attendees at this meeting and forward it directly to the attorney. So when we have our next meeting, we will have a document that may or may not have received attorney review and approval.
Okay. Tree, would you pass that information on to Nicole as an absent board member to just make sure that she knows what we're doing?
Well, she would watch this as soon as she is able to, so she'll know. Also, I will make sure that our county attorney gets this. I'll send it to him today.
Can you wait until we find out if we have any additions or corrections?
Oh, absolutely. I
members
will,
of the
I
board.
will wait for you to tell me to send it, Hal.
Okay, we'll
No
do. Tree.
problem.
For what it's worth, the potential violations don't really include anything that are solely absentee by mail voting issues. It's only voting in person.
I think our biggest issue with this is, with absentee by mail or so forth, those are all going to come through our election supervisor,
That's why I left them off.
who knows what needs to be done.
Exactly.
What we're dealing with is a situation, say, where a precinct person was looking at that, was faced with a situation and didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah, that's why I left them off. Yeah.
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 And I want to thank Sherry again for the effort.
I would
put
guess,
in.
with pleasure. I think, the issue is I used kindly, and I mean this in the most kind way, I kind of used wording that a poll worker might understand in terms of the violation. And of course, there may be our legal team, may not agree with the wording. So,
Right.
that
But
takes
you've
but I
done
did show the codes every time. So,
you've
yeah.
done the majority of the training for our election workers. So
Yeah.
no one would be in a better position to understand what they need to read.
yeah,
This form is really designed for them to be able to handle a situation,
correct.
as opposed to our legal team, which might deal with it in a different way. So unless the legal team says that we've done something incorrect, it seems to me that the way you've done it is the way it should be done.
Well, we'll see, because I mean, it does eventually lead to the prosecutor and, so whatever. So we'll see what they say.
It might also be actually worth sending this to the prosecutor's office to see if there's anything additional information that they would need in order to be able to successfully take over a case. So maybe we should send it both places. Maybe we can send it to the prosecutor after we send it to our legal team.
Yeah, we'll get your input, the board's input first. But yes, good idea, Carolyn.
Okay. Teamwork in action. Thank you.
Thank you. That's, I think, will be very useful, and hopefully we'll never need to use it. We
Yeah.
don't have too many situations where this is a case, but if it's there, we want to be able to not have the situation that happened in 2020 happen where we now can't find the person involved.
Well, and I really thank the board, because there it is, you know, we go through this issue at every training with every poll worker, and it's always, voters aren't supposed to be able to do this, but there isn't anything other than, you know, your kind influence and your, you know, terrific way of managing it. So this does provide some opportunity for clarifying and next steps with them. So,
I mean, I know that I was in a situation back when I was working polls where, you know, somebody drove up with a campaign poster in the front of their car, and I just said, I'm sorry, but that's not allowed. And they changed it. This, I think, was maybe the first situation we've had where somebody said, no, you're wrong. So, but we know that it might come up again.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so Hal will, or the board will send any revisions to Hal, who will then add those, and then we will pass that on to county legal, and from there to the prosecutor's office, and then have a final say.
Right. Yep. I will forward the results to Tree for passing on to the legal services. Thank you.
Okay, our next item on the agenda, Karen, is this situation of potential voter fraud. Could you give us an overview of what happened? I think you're on mute, Karen.
We got a phone call for somebody that was asking a lot of questions, and ended up, it was a person who is a journalist and was trying to find out a lot of things about how we register people, how we purge people, how we, just everything, just the whole thing. But it was way more than normal. And because of that situation, it made someone in our office to kind of just check into a little bit more of who this person was. And through that, we found out that there was a registration that was made with her driver's license and her address and her signature with a different name. And she was called, and she said she did not know that person. Through more research, we found out that she has written about doing voter fraud in Florida. She purposely did it, trying to get someone registered, false information to get a false voter registration application, or not a file, but actually a registration. So we called the state and wanted to know, we actually accepted this incorrectly. We shouldn't have accepted it, but we did. It was an error on our part. It was after the election, the general election in 2020. And she does have, there is this registration with this name we can't find any connection to. It seems like it's a made-up name. We don't really know, but it's at this address with the other person's driver's license number that was done online. That person is never, the false one has never voted, and I don't believe it would ever happen because we do check signatures, and it would have never matched. It was actually a different name, and the signature would not have looked anything alike. So she has printed things, and I think all the election board has got that information stating that she was proving that Florida, you can falsify information. And that she's trying to show that there is great possibility of doing voter fraud. Well, so now we're at the point, do we believe what she has written in Florida? Also, when we did call the state, her name was not mentioned. And then Angie Nussmeier said, who is this? And tell me the name. And she recognized the name and she said that she has actually committed voter fraud in several states. So the state of Indiana is aware of this person. So what do we want to do?
Okay, so one, we will point out that we did err in the fact that this name of the voter and the signature are two different names, but everybody is human. We'll also say that she claims that this makes voter fraud, particularly voter fraud by mail, really easy, that she's done it, and yet in actual fact, she never has. The point that I'm trying to make is that there are a number of checks and balances between the time you register and the time that your vote is recorded, and each of those steps has situations where we potentially could catch these problems. Now, in Florida, they don't have the ID requirements, or at least they didn't at the time, that we have here in Indiana, which might have made it easier. But there are a lot of checks and balances between the time that you register to vote and you actually do so. And she's never actually committed voter fraud, but she has, we think, committed voter registration fraud at this level.
Karen, when you say, what do we do? What are my options?
I cannot unregister her because once we accept a registration, they are registered. But we also have the ability that the election board now can decide if they think this is some fraudulent behavior. And then we can invite this person to the next meeting and she can defend herself. Or we can, or we, you guys, as the election board can decide there's nothing to it, we're just going to drop it and move on. Or deciding we need to, I just feel like I'm a part of you guys, right?
The royal works here.
Is there a need for more information? So we can take this to prosecute her if we feel like there is enough information, or we can collect more information, or we can say there is nothing to it.
I think we've seen a substantial amount of information so far in the documents you forwarded to us. And at this point, I'd be comfortable in asking the prosecutor to also review the materials and determine whether there is suspicion of voter registration fraud here.
All right, so I have sent this information on to Lee Baker, but you would want it to the county prosecutor? Is that what you're saying?
I believe that's the procedure, isn't it, Carolyn?
Yeah, I talked to the deputy prosecutor, to Jeff Kerr, a couple of days ago about the situation in general and how it might be handled. And I think that we warrant additional information. And I think that the best way to do that and to get the full details, because we know Florida, but we don't maybe know from what Angie Nussmeier said, there may be additional cases. We don't know whether those situations were taken up in those states and why they decided or didn't decide to prosecute at that time. But there's obviously a trend here. She did the same thing in Indiana that she did in Florida. This is not a simple mistake. She might argue that it's journalistic integrity and she's trying to prove that as an issue, but that doesn't negate the fact that she did what she did. And, you know, this is now the third or fourth time. In Florida, I think that the registration was actually there for like 8 years before she then attained a vote by mail ballot, which she didn't vote, but she obtained that. She did finally contact the Secretary of State and say, how did this happen? But that was after sort of tweeting that vote by mail fraud is easy. So my issue here is that, one, I think we need more information. And two, I don't think we need to ask her why she did it. I do believe that the best option is to send this to the prosecutor's office for a full investigation. They have the ability to do things that we don't do. Jeff said that they actually would like us to give them permission to forward it on to the state police, who could then do across state boundaries investigations that we would have absolutely no ability to deal with. And so to me, the next step is to send this to the prosecutor's office for a full investigation. They would also interview this person, and eventually they would decide whether they thought that charges should be filed or not. But I think they have the ability to investigate, and they have the power to talk to people that we don't have power to talk to. And so my recommendation would be that that's the next step, is to forward this to the prosecutor's office for an investigation.
I concur.
I too agree. However, I think you're going to find out that even though it's very important to us, the prosecutor's office and the state police have bigger things to worry about. So it may not go anywhere.
Jeff said he will take it wherever he can. Now, whether or not the state police do, I don't know, but that's not, that's their call. The prosecutor's office could do an internal investigation that maybe didn't go across state lines, but that was his recommendation. So my guess is that it'll at least go that far. It's possible that it won't go further. And that we have to make a decision or the prosecutor's office has to make a decision based on the information that they're able to attain without a state police investigation. But I still think that's our best way of dealing with the situation and getting the full details. They just have powers that we don't have.
Yeah, I believe it's a zero tolerance situation.
Okay.
And it's obviously, it's not the first issue. And if this had happened and they came to us and said, hey, I'm a journalist and I'm investigating something, and this is what happened, and how do we deal with it? Well, maybe we would have worked with that to see if there were other steps that we were missing. But in actual fact, this is the analogy I like is to use is Draco Malfoy turned in Harry and Hermione for being out of Hogwarts after hours, and he ended up having to go to detention too, because he was out of Hogwarts after hours too. What happened, there's not necessarily an excuse for it. Let's put it that way. It's the law, it's not the law.
Yeah.
So what I would like to do is to recommend that we pass this along to the prosecutor's office for an investigation, see what happens there. If they end up choosing not to do anything, then we can make our own decisions. But we don't have any ability to deal with this fraudulent registration until that is determined, at which point then we may be able to do something about taking it down. We do need to obviously to flag it. And the other thing that we might want to think about is, are there checks and balances that maybe we should put in place so it doesn't happen again? But I think it's, number one, rare that it would happen. But two, maybe there's some things that we might want to think about doing just to deal with that. Maybe a second set of eyes on every form. Unfortunately, our guys are already so overworked that that's a problem, but that might be something that we have to think about. So I think internally we can maybe think about issues, but on the other hand, this issue already happened.
Yep.
Tree? There you go.
I hate to be deceived, and I hate people to make a mockery of what we hold so dear. So if we decide that you want to take it to the prosecutor, I'm all for it. The nosy part of me wants to know, why would she do this? I mean, be real. I have better things to do in my life. Why doesn't she also? Or if it is a she, could be a he, I don't know. But let's take it to the prosecutor and see if it goes anywhere.
Yeah.
I think in the process, we may learn why, and there might be reasons why this person thought it was valuable, but it's not valuable to us unless they work with us to make the situation better. And that's not what they've done here.
Right. Not working with us seems to make it a willful violation of the election laws to me, but that has to be proven by the prosecutor's office.
So I will make a motion that we pass this information on to the prosecutor's office for a full investigation. Is there a second to that?
I second it.
Karen, would you call the roll?
All right, Hal Turner.
Yes.
Yes, okay. I thought I was on mute. Tree Martin,
Yes,
Carolyn Vandeweel,
Yes.
3 A's, yeses.
Okay. I told Jeff I would call him and let him know that we were doing this. Karen, and I'll get information about where you should send information, Karen. And he can also contact you for additional stuff.
All right. Is that Jeff Kerr?
Jeff Kerr, yeah.
Okay.
I'd worked with him on an earlier case, so that's why I called him.
I have a couple old pieces of old business whenever you get to that.
I believe that that concludes the new business that we had on our agenda. So,
get this over with. We've been talking for 2 hours.
I hear you, Sherry.
1 hour and 46 minutes. So we've got 14 minutes to go. So let's pass this back to Karen.
Okay, so this is about the Salt Creek Township Board situation. We had Joe Hickman stepping down, and I've gotten his papers. I've got his resignation letter, and that's fine. Then we have, Guy Cunningham was stepping down, and he is, I have his resignation letter. And then Joe Hickman was replacing him. I still need a CEB 3 and an oath of office. And I have from the previous election board meeting that did say the same thing, that that I had heard from Guy Cunningham, that he may have resigned from the Salt Creek Board to be replaced by Joe Hickman. The elections office has no resignation papers and only partial papers from Joe Hickman. Carolyn Vandeweel will follow up to confirm the status and encourage completion of all required paperwork. And I think you did perhaps talk to Jennifer.
I've done some talking, but unfortunately I've not talked to Don Hall. And you did say that the trustee could do the oath of office. He doesn't need to come into town. Is that correct?
We have done that in the past, yes.
I will get hold of Don this week. Last month was kind of an interesting month.
All right, then another piece, I have Valerie Houghton from our election board meeting, April 1st. It says, this candidate has filed, meaning Valerie Houghton, but it is the third late filing. Hal Turner made a motion to follow the general board policy to assess 25% of the $900 fine, or to fine this candidate $225. Tree Martin seconded the motion. And I have notes that Carolyn will do a follow-up and a letter needs to be sent. I haven't heard anything from Val, or I don't have a letter.
I will take care of that again also. One question that I need to know is, and Tree, maybe you can answer this question. If they write a check, who should they write it to?
Monroe County Clerk, they can put it in their memo field that it's for a CFA violation. Karen, starting this month, will get a report with who all pays their fines from our Odyssey system. So we've got it all in place now, and then people just going to pay up.
Okay, so if they write a check to the Monroe County Clerk and they put in the memo, because one of the issues had been, we didn't know whether people came in and paid, and then whether that money was going back to us as it should versus somewhere.
It does. No, we've always known that it came back to the election fund. We didn't know where the report was. We have found the report, and it can be generated.
Okay, so we'll deal with that, and I will get back to
And that wasn't a small thing either, because Jesse had to work pretty hard to get that work through Odyssey and all the stuff that you guys went through to get that report. So good job, Jesse.
Yeah, we had issues in the past, like I believe Steve Volan came in and paid his fine, and we couldn't find that he had done it or where that went at the time. So
We have found it, and I can prove that he has paid every penny that he was
any of
deemed.
that little fine that he was assessed, yes.
Yes. Now, the problem is if you are coming in to pay or sending, you need to send certified funds. The
So
clerk
they-
does not accept a personal check.
Okay, so how should they pay that?
They can pay by money order or cash, or you can go to your bank and get a certified check.
Okay.
We don't accept it from anyone, so we're not making anybody different. It's standard procedure.
So money
The
order-
reason why I didn't suggest debit or credit card is there is a fee, a user fee on your debit or credit card. And I am too stingy to let my money go away, so I would never use it. I suggest going to your bank and getting certified funds.
Okay, so certified
free.
bank check, a money
Money
order
order
or cash.
or cash, and you can use your debit or credit card.
But that's the fourth on our list.
It would be my last choice.
One other question then, do they need to make an appointment to come into clerk's office to drop
At-
things
At
off?
this time, yes, they do. It's not hard to do. You just call in and we write your name on our list and we give it to the guard every day. It's a good thing. We're here to help you.
Okay. That answers all the questions that I had about how people need to deal with that.
And I have one more. Also on the last meeting, April 1st, it says on July 2nd, 2020, the board assessed a fine of $100 to this candidate who is Ryan Maloney. No record of payment is made or is not available. Carolyn will draft a letter to Ryan to address payment of this fine and provide the letter to the election office within a week of processing, for processing.
That was the same question. I needed the answers to those questions to be able to deal with that.
Okay,
We'll get that to you this week,
okay.
early next week.
And then can we mention anything about easy vote? Or wait? Mystery.
We have 7 minutes and there may be public comment.
Okay. I would throw it out there because this is a wonderful thing for the
Yeah.
candidates coming up.
Yeah.
So we have, looks like we've gotten approval for something that's called Easy Vote, and that will be for candidates being able to submit their CFA forms, all of them online. And so they can do it from home, they can do it from their car, wherever they got their computer. I think they can do it on their phone. Is that right? I think so. And so this is going to be a really good thing. It's not in process yet, but we won't have any candidate filing until January. But that will help a lot. It will give notices to people to make sure that they are reminded to send it in. It will tell them if they are late, we can set it up so that they'll even be told if they miss their deadline, this is what it could cost them. There's a lot of really good things built into that. It also helps them when they fill out their forms. It keeps previous ones, so it'll do an automatic fill on certain lines. But then it also will not let them proceed without filling out everything that they need to. And for anything that is adding or subtracting, it takes care of the math in there for them. So we've heard great reports from other people, other candidates in other counties that have done it. the state just had changed some laws that this is a pretty new thing that enables counties to do this. So we really wanted to get on board with this, getting us a little bit more modern in that area. The state's had it for years, but we were not able to do it because of law. But now we are moving in that direction, still going to, yeah, we're learning a lot about it. And I think the contract may have gotten signed this week or will get signed shortly.
So
So-
is this something that the Secretary of State's office has contracted with a company to set up, or that they've done, or is it just?
Individual counties.
Individual counties, and our commissioners did sign the contract. We are so excited.
Yeah.
It's also searchable from the public.
Yep.
Let's say you know somebody and you're not real sure. There are such a big spectrum of ways you can search. Let's say you know a dollar amount. So you put in your dollar amount as, $100. It will populate every person in Monroe County that donated $100. It's amazing.
Yeah, it sounds great. And it certainly is going to make the election supervisor's office job
Oh,
a lot
Yes,
easier.
yes,
And,
yes.
And automated procedures make it easy to maintain a much larger group of work too. Let me ask one question though. Will candidates' addresses and other personal information that they fill out on these forms be available to the general public?
Okay, it already is. Once we put it on the websites, it's already there.
Right.
However, there's some people that do not want their addresses shown. Let's say like a judge or a sheriff, maybe.
Yeah.
We can hide that information. We can set up our program to say every judge will have their address hidden. Every sheriff will have his address hidden, and then it is not searchable by the public.
Okay.
But if you're a normal candidate,
Yeah.
I make judges and sheriffs sound abnormal. You are a normal candidate, like, let's say a clerk. Your address will be out there.
Okay. And
Can
if they
they opt out?
if they
Can they
have a
opt out?
history- Yeah.
You could probably put a
Yeah,
post
box
office
on.
box instead of
Yeah.
your home address.
Okay.
And they
Okay.
But you
can
have to
file,
have an address.
and they
Because
can
there are,
file,
we do have cases where candidates have been harassed
Mm-hmm.
in the past. And if they were running again, they would not want to be harassed.
Agreed. They could put a post office box at that point.
Okay.
and they can file by paper if they want. But I had one great story that was a judge in Texas who their county did it for a year and then, or at least a year. And then they decided not to because of financial situations. And so they were going to drop it. And he was like, absolutely not. I will find the money. We have to keep this, because he just absolutely loved being able to file from any place. And that happens so often. It's like, oh my goodness, it's today, deadline, and I need to bring this paperwork in. They can do it on their computer and it helps them. And that's the big deal. Not everybody likes filling out these forms, so it makes that much easier. It's going to make my life easier, but I think it's going to benefit the candidates even more.
Does
Exactly.
that give them an 11:59 clock on filing day?
I presume that it's time stamped when they
Yes.
submit.
Okay.
And they get their receipt right there.
That would have helped Jeff Bradley, who was mowing the lawn and lost track of time. And, when he realized at 11:45 that he had to be into the office, he wasn't going to make it by whatever, but he could have submitted his form.
He could.
Okay. That's great. Sounds like a wonderful tool.
All right. Is there any further old business, new business before the board? Then I will open this up to public comment before we adjourn. B Square Beacon.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Dave Askins with the B Square Beacon. Two things. One, I was not the journalist who committed voter registration fraud. Two, I just wanted to ask Hal Turner a very hardball question. Who are these two esteemed individuals who are in your background? That's my question for today. Thanks.
Right. They are James and Margaret Reed. They are the two of the survivors of the Donner Party. And yesterday was the anniversary of their rescue.
Enough said on that one.
Exactly. Is there further public comment?
Yes.
Lee?
Yeah.
May I please speak? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm County Commissioner Lee Jones, and I'm here with the Board of Commissioners to discuss space needs for the future elections. And I'll start by reviewing what we've already done. In 2019, Clerk Brown requested that the commissioners assign all the space in the Johnson Hardware Building to Election Central. Community corrections have been housed there for almost a decade, and the county, they have been renting. The county eventually bought the building because the rental became so expensive, and it was bought for them. At that time, there was a tenant in the downstairs, and Election Central wasn't moved there until the tenant moved out. It would be very difficult to move probation, both because of the volume of daily business that they do throughout the entire year and the length of time they've been there and their particular clientele, who would be quite confused by this, and it could really cause them some pretty big problems. We have, when the justice study is finished off, we are planning to review the space needs of the entire county. And of course, that'll include election needs. That's a very important need for us. In the meantime, we have made a large room available in showers, which I realize is not at all ideal, but it is temporary. Until we can come up with a better solution. The commissioners had met with Carolyn Vanderweel in 2019 about space needs at the Johnson Hardware store. We talked about equipment management, ballot processing, and early voting. In early 2020, the commissioners met with Tree Martin and Karen Wheeler to work through a proposed remodel of the space in Johnson Hardware. On January 22nd, 2020, the commissioners approved contracts to remodel Election Central with the removal of half walls, which the previous clerk had requested, and by replacing the flooring. On February 6th, I came to the election board and offered the room in North Showers building for your use. You determined that you did not need it at that time. It was noted that the expanded space due to the remodeling was sufficient. The voting space was nearly doubled. The secure ballot room had been expanded, and a storage area had been remodeled for office space. At this time, the election board stated that the expanded space would be very beneficial for the election. They were grateful that the Board of Commissioners had supported the renovation, and the Board of Commissioners visited the new space, and the staff there expressed both excitement and contentment with the space. In March of 2020, everything changed when a pandemic was declared. And obviously that dramatically changed the need for space and also the election timing. In late July, Tree Martin expressed a need for more space for early voting workers from October 1st through November 6th. The convention center and the Nat U Hill meeting room were offered. Ms. Martin noted that the space problem was due to the required social distancing. She stated that she loved the remodeled Election Central, and in a normal world, it would meet their needs. They requested that tables and chairs be set up on the third floor of the courthouse in the hallways, and that 4 computers be installed in the Nat U Hill room. At this time, the courthouse was locked. It was not open to the public. There were cameras at every entryway, on every floor, and in the Nat U Hill meeting room. The Nat U Hill room was used by election workers, but the hallways appeared not to have been. In early October, members of the board commission were told of a desperate need for yet more space. Angie Purdy sent an email asking about this, and Tree Martin said that the space in the courthouse was fine, but they would like to have another room in the downstairs of the Johnson Hardware building for processing ballots. Community Corrections did provide that room for them. So basically, over the past couple of years, we've heard both compliments and complaints about space for Election Central. We are here today to request that the election board provide clarity on space needs for in-person early voting and processing for the next election cycle. In particular, what we would like to be told about your needs for are processing mail-in ballots. And of course, 2020 was an outlier concerning that. Also for hosting early voters. And we would appreciate it if you would consider both COVID and post-COVID scenarios for that. Whether satellite voting will be used to augment Election Central and provide ballot access for citizens outside of Bloomington, which of these space needs are temporary and which are permanent. And also what the ongoing requirements are for storing equipment and records. And please note that downtown storage of these things isn't really a very practical thing because it's pretty pricey real estate. And also there's a retention schedule for records which should be followed. The county shouldn't be paying to store records that are no longer legally meant to be kept. That's a bit of a list, so we'll email it all to you. And hopefully, if by midsummer you could let us know what your needs are, we could get everything settled in advance of any elections and not have to do last minute scrambling. So
Ms. Jones, I think that's a wonderful idea. If you would get that email out to me as soon as possible, I would appreciate it so very much. Yeah, all of those things. And I tried to write them down, but then they became too numerous.
yeah,
So if you would get that into an email, it would be greatly appreciated.
sure, we'd be pleased to do that and look forward to hearing what your needs are.
I appreciate that. And as far as our retention schedule, we are right on the money on our retention schedule with our ballots and our election materials. So that's not an issue in the space at all.
Okay, thank you. We just wanted to mention that. Just
Sure. Well, you don't know what you don't know. So yes, get me that email.
okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I know you have had a very long meeting. I know what that feels like.
Thank you, Lee. That's
And I would like to thank the commissioners for the remodel of Election Central. Had there not been COVID, I think we would have been in so much better position. It really looks nice. People like their offices. And I think we were able to consolidate things in a better way to go. But COVID certainly put a wrench in all of our works this year.
It changed pretty much everything in the county. So
Well, that is true. And had we not had the virus, we would not be so concerned about space issues. As I sit beside Sherry, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not 6 feet apart. We are never going to be able to crowd those people in like we did in the past. Pandemic or no pandemic, we will never be able to put 200 to 300 people in that area that we have. The fire marshal would not be happy.
yeah. Well,
So yes, give me that email. I'm sorry, give me that email.
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
very
I'd also like to say thanks for the use of the Nat U Hill building. The people that work there were really happy with that space and the ability to do that.
good. Great. Well, we'll look forward to hearing from you then. Thanks.
Is there additional public comment? Hearing none. Our next meeting will be on the first Thursday in July, which is July 1st at 1 PM at the moment.
What about June?
Sorry, that's
June.
right, June. Sorry, I'm a month ahead of us. June, it'll be June 3rd. As far as we know, we're still meeting by Zoom.
I move, we adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
I second it.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. I know it was a long meeting, but I thought it was also very informative.
Mhm.